My name is Thabia al-Naimi. In Arabic, my name means the gazelle, graceful, fast, and hunted. On November 14, 2023, I became the hunted. I was sentenced to death by the Qatari High Court for the crime of possessing a Bible and leaving Islam. They stripped me of my silks, mocked my faith, and prepared the sword.
But they forgot one thing. The hunter of souls, Jesus Christ, had already claimed me as his own. This is my testimony of supernatural deliverance. Before I tell you how the impossible happened inside a maximum security prison, I need to know who I am sharing this miracle with. Tell me in the comments right now, where are you listening from? Please, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It costs you nothing, but it helps us spread these testimonies to the dark corners of the world where people are desperate for hope. I was born into the heart of Qatar's immense wealth, the only daughter of a lineage that helped build the skyline of Doha. From my very first breath, I was swaddled in luxury that makes the stories of fairy tales look modest. Our villa in the Pearl Qatar was not just a home, it was a fortress of opulence, stretching across manicured grounds with floors made of imported Italian marble that cooled my feet and chandeliers dripping with Swarovski crystals that cost more than an average family earns in a lifetime. I had my own private wing, where servants attended to my every need, from brushing my hair to preparing my meals on silver platters. But let me tell you the truth about golden cages. Even when the bars are made of 24-karat gold, they are still cages. Despite having everything money could buy, my soul was starving. I owned the latest luxury cars, spent my weekends on private yachts cruising the Persian Gulf, and traveled to the most exotic destinations on Earth. Yet, every single night, I would stare at my reflection in the ornate mirror, tracing my dark, dense eyebrows and looking at my soft, button nose that still looked so youthful, wondering why I felt so old and dead inside. The emptiness within me grew larger with each passing year, a desert expanding in my chest. My religious education began when I was just a child. Every morning before the desert sun rose, my tutors would arrive to ensure I was the perfect image of a devout Muslim woman. I spent hours reciting verses in Arabic, wrapping my cool gray headscarf tight to signal my devotion. By the time I was a teenager, I had memorized vast portions of the Quran. The 5 daily prayers were enforced with strict discipline. My family monitored me constantly, making sure I performed each ritual flawlessly. From the ablutions to the prostrations, I executed everything perfectly, but I felt absolutely nothing inside. The words seemed hollow, like reciting a grocery list without meaning. During prayer time, while my body performed the movements, my mind wandered to questions that frightened me deeply. Why did I feel so disconnected from Allah? Why did the prayers feel like meaningless repetitions? Why was I forbidden from questioning anything about our faith? In Qatar, even the elite are watched. We knew that maintaining the appearance of perfect Islamic conduct was crucial for our honor. I witnessed how the society treated those who stepped out of line, and it disturbed me profoundly. But I was taught that my submission was God's perfect design. I thought my wealth could save me from anything. But when the handcuffs clicked around my wrists, I realized my millions were just paper. Yet, in that moment of terror, I carried a secret inside my heart that was worth more than the entire city of Doha. A secret that would soon turn a prison cell into a holy sanctuary. My life in Doha was a parade of shimmering lights and suffocating silence. To the outside world, I lived in a modern paradise, a city where glass skyscrapers pierced the clouds and defied the harsh desert sun. Our family's influence was etched into the very skyline of West Bay, as permanent and imposing as the steel structures that overlooked the turquoise waters of the Corniche. I spent my days being chauffeured in armored Bentleys and Rolls-Royces, moving from air-conditioned palaces to exclusive designer boutiques, shielded from the searing heat and the reality of the world. We wore our wealth like armor. My abayas were custom-made, woven with threads of real gold and dusted with crystals that caught the light with every step I took. Yet, beneath the layers of silk and social expectation, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I remember standing before my vanity mirror one sweltering afternoon, staring at the stranger looking back at me. My dark, dense eyebrows, the feature everyone complimented, saying they gave me a look of fierce determination, seemed to mock me. They framed eyes that had forgotten how to spark with joy. I picked up my headscarf, a cool, slate-gray fabric that I preferred over the stark black worn by most. As I wrapped it carefully around my head, framing my face, I realized I wasn't just covering my hair. I was hiding my sorrow. The cool gray tones clashed with the warmth of my skin, a visual war that mirrored the battle raging inside my chest. I had the button nose of a young woman and the weary eyes of someone who had lived 1,000 lifetimes of boredom. 5 times a day, the adhan would echo across the city, the call to prayer bouncing off the glass towers and rolling over the dunes. For my father and brothers, it was a call to duty, a rhythm that gave their lives structure and power. But for me, it was a distant echo that never quite reached my heart. I would kneel on my velvet prayer rug, my forehead touching the ground, desperate to feel a connection, a spark, anything. But the sky felt like brass, and my prayers felt like they were dissolving into the recycled air of my bedroom. I was performing a play for an audience of one, and I was exhausted. I needed an escape, not just from the heat, but from the crushing weight of being Dabia, the perfect daughter. I convinced my father that I needed to update my wardrobe for the upcoming season. Paris was the only cure for my restlessness, or so I thought. I packed my bags with the finest clothes, anticipating another week of hollow luxury and fleeting distractions. I had diamonds on my fingers, but dust in my soul. I was planning my next vacation to escape the boredom, never knowing that a single trip to Paris would turn me into a criminal wanted by my own father. Paris was a different universe. The air smelled of rain and roasted chestnuts, not the omnipresent dust of the desert. I had flown in for Fashion Week, staying in a sprawling suite at the Hotel Plaza Athene. For the first time in months, I was physically alone. My bodyguards were stationed in the hallway, leaving me in the silence of my room with nothing but my thoughts. It was in this silence, bored and restless, that I began opening the drawers of the antique mahogany desk, looking for stationery. Instead, my fingers brushed against cool, black leather. It was a Bible, likely left behind by a previous guest who had forgotten it, or perhaps left it on purpose. In Qatar, possession of this book by a Muslim woman could be seen as an act of treason against our culture. My hands trembled as I held it, feeling the weight of the forbidden. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I opened it. I didn't start at the beginning. The pages fell open to the Gospel of Luke. I began to read, and time seemed to dissolve. I stumbled upon the story of the woman with the issue of blood, a woman who had suffered for 12 years, spent all her money on doctors, and only grew worse. She was an outcast, unclean, and desperate. I saw myself in her. I had spent a fortune trying to cure the sickness in my soul, yet I only grew emptier. When I read that she touched the hem of Jesus' garment and was instantly healed, I waited for him to rebuke her. Instead, he turned and said, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." The word, daughter, shattered me. In all my years of religious study, I had never felt like a daughter to God, only a servant, a subject, a slave. Tears streamed down my face, soaking my expensive silk blouse. In that Parisian hotel room, the gazelle stopped running. I had found the water. The return trip was a nightmare of paranoia. I couldn't leave the book behind. I wrapped the Bible in layers of lace and hidden it deep within the lining of my Louis Vuitton luggage. The flight back to Doha felt like a funeral procession for my old life. When we landed at Hamad International Airport, the futuristic terminal felt like the belly of a beast. I walked toward customs, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The customs officers, men I usually passed with a nod of entitlement, suddenly looked like executioners. I watched my bag disappear into the X-ray scanner. I held my breath, praying to this new Jesus, begging him to blind their eyes. The belt stopped. The officer frowned at the screen. My blood ran cold. Then he waved his hand. "Go ahead, Miss Al-Naimi." I made it through customs with the book hidden in my designer luggage. But I didn't know that the eyes watching me weren't the airport security. They were the eyes of someone living under my own roof, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy me. The nights in Doha are never truly dark. The city glows with an artificial amber haze. But inside my room, I created my own darkness, huddled under a heavy duvet with a small flashlight. The beam illuminated the thin pages of the Psalms, the light reflecting off the tip of my soft-button nose as I whispered the words of David. For weeks, this had been my ritual. I was a thief in my own home, stealing moments of grace while the rest of the villa slept. I felt safe in my cocoon, foolishly believing that the heavy oak door was enough to keep the world out. I didn't hear the handle turn. In our culture, male relatives often walk with an air of ownership over the women in their family, and my cousin Jassim was no exception. The door swung open, flooding the room with a harsh hallway light. I scrambled to hide the book, but I was too slow. Jassim stood there, his eyes adjusting to the gloom, landing squarely on the black leather binding in my trembling hands. He didn't ask what it was. He knew. The look on his face wasn't just shock, it was disgust. He snatched the book from me, reading the gold lettering on the spine. "You have brought a curse into this house," he hissed, his voice trembling with a toxic mix of fear and self-righteousness. I begged him to listen, to let me explain the peace I had found, but his heart was hardened by pride. He wasn't thinking about my soul, he was thinking about his standing in the Majlis. Jassim betrayed me to save his reputation. Many of you are betraying Jesus right now by hiding your faith or refusing to support his work because you fear what people will think. Don't be a coward like my cousin. Subscribe to this channel now to stand with the persecuted. If you can't even click a button for Christ, how will you face a sword for him? Tell me in the comments why you are hesitating. Jassim left the room with a Bible, and within the hour, the silence of our estate was shattered by the screeching of tires. It wasn't the police, it was state security. They didn't knock. They stormed the marble foyer with boots that muddied the pristine floors. My father stood at the top of the stairs, pale and silent, as men in dark uniforms swarmed my private wing. When they found me, I didn't fight. I stood still, my gray headscarf slipping slightly as they wrenched my arms behind my back. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into my wrists that had only ever known the weight of gold bracelets. The shame was physical, a nausea rising in my throat as I was marched past the servants who had known me since birth. They averted their eyes. As they dragged me out, my mother screamed, but she didn't scream for my safety. She screamed for the family's lost honor. That was the last time I saw the sun for 40 days. The transition from the velvet-lined walls of my villa to the concrete tomb of the State Security Detention Center was a shock that nearly stopped my heart. I was thrown into a holding cell that smelled of damp rot and ancient fear, a stark contrast to the scent of oud and jasmine that had perfumed my entire life. But the true violation began when a female guard entered. She didn't speak. She simply reached out and ripped the cool gray headscarf from my head. For years, that scarf had been my shield, framing my face and hiding my sorrow. As it was torn away, my dark hair tumbled down around my shoulders, leaving me feeling utterly naked and exposed. I instinctively tried to cover myself with my hands, but she slapped them away. I was no longer a protected daughter of the elite. I was a piece of property that had lost its value. The interrogation began immediately and lasted for what felt like an eternity. They didn't use physical torture at first. They used exhaustion and mockery. I was sat in a metal chair in a freezing room, shivering in my thin prison tunic. The interrogator, a man with eyes as cold as the desert night, paced around me. He knew everything about my life, my shopping trips, my favorite cafes, my father's net worth. "You traded the true faith for a fairy tale written by Jews," he spat, leaning close enough for me to smell the stale tobacco on his breath. He looked at my shivering form and laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think your father is coming? You think your money works here? Look at you." He grabbed my chin, forcing me to look him in the eye. "Where is your Jesus now, princess? Is he coming to unlock these cuffs? Or has he forgotten you, just like your family has?" Every time he asked, "Where is your Jesus now, princess?" I wanted to scream, but I remained silent, holding on to the memory of the woman who touched the hem of his garment. The trial was a blur of legal fury. It took less than an hour. I stood in a defendant's cage, searching the gallery for a friendly face, but the seats reserved for family were empty. My father had not come. My existence had been erased to preserve their dignity. The judge, an elderly man with a white beard, looked at me not with pity, but with contempt. He declared me guilty of apostasy and treason against the values of the state. The sentence was death by execution. The judge broke his pen after signing my death warrant, a symbol that the decision was irreversible. I was taken to death row, where the silence was so loud it sounded like screaming. But I wasn't alone in that cell. The hours before an execution are a specific kind of torture, a slow countdown where every heartbeat feels like a drum marking the end of your existence. It was the night of November 13th. I sat in the corner of my cell, my knees pulled tightly to my chest, my face buried in my trembling hands. I was weeping, not the polite, silent tears I had been taught to shed as a lady of the court, but ugly, shaking sobs that racked my entire body. I could feel the cold dampness of the concrete seeping into my bones, a chill that whispered of the grave waiting for me at dawn. I tried to pray, but fear had seized my throat. I was just a girl who wanted truth, and now I was going to die for it. Then, the darkness dissolved. It didn't happen gradually. 1 second, I was in pitch blackness. The next, my cell was filled with a light so brilliant it should have blinded me, yet it was soothing to my eyes. It was brighter than the midday desert sun reflecting off the dunes of the Khor al-Adade, but it carried no scorching heat, only a profound, vibrating intensity. I looked up, shielding my eyes, and there he was. He stood in the center of my tiny cell, his presence pushing back the stone walls. He didn't look like the Western paintings I had seen in art books in Paris. He looked like ancient power wrapped in mercy. He looked at me, and I saw the universe in his eyes. He didn't ask me why I was afraid. He didn't ask if I was ready to die. He reached out a hand, and his voice sounded like many waters, resonating deep in my chest. He spoke in perfect, lyrical Arabic. "Run, gazelle," he commanded, his voice tender yet authoritative. "I have broken the snare." As he spoke my name, the name that meant I was the hunted, he reclaimed it. I wasn't being hunted by death anymore. I was being set loose by the life. A sensation of pure, thick peace washed over me, starting from the crown of my head and flowing down to my toes. It was warm and heavy, like a weighted blanket of liquid love. The cold undertones of the gray prison walls, the damp smell of rot, the terror of the executioner, it all vanished. I wasn't trembling anymore. I stood up, my legs steady, my heart beating with a rhythm of victory I had never known in the safety of my palace. He didn't just give me peace. He gave me a key. Not a metal key for the lock, but a supernatural key that turned reality upside down. When the light faded, I heard the heavy iron bolt of my cell door slide back all by itself. I stepped into the corridor, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, expecting the piercing wail of sirens or the shout of a guard. But the silence was absolute. It was a heavy, supernatural silence that felt thicker, than the concrete walls. I walked past the central command station, where 3 guards usually sat watching the monitors with hawk-like vigilance. They were there, but they were slumped over their consoles, their mouths slightly open, locked in a sleep so deep it looked like death. One of them had his hand on his rifle, but his fingers were limp. God had sent a spirit of slumber upon the entire prison, turning the lions into sleeping lambs. I walked through the labyrinth of the detention center, a ghost in my own nightmare. Doors that required biometric scans and passcodes simply clicked open at my approach, the electronic locks disengaging with a soft thud that sounded like music. I walked out through the main gates, past the outer perimeter, and into the humid night air of Doha. I stood on the pavement, inhaling the scent of freedom. It tasted of exhaust fumes and sea salt, and it was the sweetest thing I had ever smelled. A white taxi was idling at the curb, its headlights dimmed, as if it had been waiting for me specifically. I opened the back door and slid in. The driver, an elderly man with a kind face, didn't ask why a woman in a prison tunic was hailing a cab at 3 a.m. He didn't ask for money I didn't have. He simply looked at me in the rearview mirror and said, "Airport?" I nodded, unable to speak. I am alive today because God moved mountains. But there are thousands still in those cells. If you have listened this far and still haven't subscribed, you are turning your back on their stories. Do not let your heart be hardened like the guards who held me captive.
Subscribe now.
If you won't, go to the comments and explain to God why your convenience matters more than our suffering. The drive to the airport was a blur of neon lights and silent prayers. I moved through the terminal invisible to the cameras that should have flagged me, invisible to the officers who should have arrested me. I boarded a flight to Frankfurt, and as the wheels lifted off the tarmac, I watched the glittering skyline of Doha disappear beneath the clouds. My golden cage was gone. I landed in Europe with nothing but the clothes on my back and the fire in my heart. My family thinks Dabia the gazelle is dead. But they are wrong. The old Dabia died in that cell. The woman who walked out is a warrior, and her story is just beginning.